All right, welcome back to another episode of Chasing Frets. My name is Jason Chadrick.
And I'm Andy Ellis, right over here in Nashville, Tennessee.
And Nili Brosh is our guest today. And as you heard on Monday, she's had a considerable amount of experience, playing a bunch of different gigs. And today's topic that we're going to talk about is something that really I've always even struggled with personally in my playing. That's ear training. And I know, Andy, you and Nili are both Berklee grads, as we talk about. Was ear training a topic that they hit back in the day when you were at Berklee? How did they handle that?
It was one of the key disciplines. And when I mean key, I'm not talking about the key of B flat. I mean, there was no recording at Berklee at all at the time. There was no songwriting. There was no how to have a career. Nothing like that. It was a jazz school, and by golly, you'd better get your ear training together, and it was rugged.
And to me, it's always one of those topics that is like eating your vegetables. It's you could find a way to enjoy it, but you just have to keep doing it in order to see the benefits. And today, Nili gives some pretty good advice about how she approaches it, what she does, some things she uses in practice. So that's today's episode. So we're going to hop right into it, and we'll be back later this week. Hey everybody, we're back again with Nili Brosh, all the way from the West Coast, and Andy Ellis, and today we are going to talk about one of the topics that I always struggled with in college, and that was ear training. Mm-hmm. And how, because it seems like no matter how much you do, you always feel like obviously you can get better. But it's one of those things that it sneaks up on you, as far as when you really need it. And also it sneaks up on you when you've actually made any kind of progress on it. So Nili, tell me a little bit about if a student were to come to you and they have their technique together, let's say, but they feel like the ear training is kind of a missing piece of their puzzle. What are some exercises or things that you would recommend to them to work on?
Well, to me, to be honest, I've never really been a fan of exercises per se, but for me, the ear thing, or at least learning music by ear, was always kind of something that I gravitated towards naturally. So, and not only that, but I've since put so many hours into it. I mean, I think if I had to log the amount of hours that I've practiced over the course of my life thus far, it was probably most of those hours went to that, to just figuring out stuff by ear, because it was before YouTube and, tabs for, weird instrumental guitar stuff and all that kind of thing. So for my students, a lot of the times I kind of start at the beginning of that process. It's just kind of trying to figure out some famous melodies or something that's really accessible and something that the student knows really well. I mean, even if it's not famous, or just something that's simple and that they know really by heart, really internally. And then I just kind of try and walk them through the process of how I, listen for the note and try and match the note on the guitar. And it's for me, it's never been rocket science. It's literally kind of hear the first note and grab that, and hear the next note and grab that, and however you need to chop up the process or pause it or whatever. So that's why I like to, start with something that's simple and, hopefully slow, but that's not an issue. You can always use softwares to slow it down. So I kind of try to go through the process with them and kind of back it up as much as necessary. If it's really someone at the beginning of their journey and they're having a hard time matching a single pitch, then it's something that we kind of we zoom into just that and work on that, and then graduate up to okay, let's do simple melodies or whatever.
It strikes me too that a unique aspect of ear training on guitar is dealing with the multiple locations of the same pitch that we have on the fretboard. So let's say you play flute, you're thinking of pitch and of course the technique with your embouchure and so on, but you're not generally speaking looking for, now which E flat is this and how do I listen for that E flat and where it's going next. Oh, it jumps the string there, or no, I'm playing from E flat to G on the same string. We have this amazing maze of streams of notes, and you particularly, because you have a 7-string, you have 7 streams of notes.
Not today,
Okay.
but
And it seems to me when we figuratively drop the needle on a song and we're trying to find out what that guitar part is, it's so much more than the pitch and the rhythm. It's like, where?
So I was the person who was like I was that like bratty kid that was so good at like being like, you know what? Let me just recognize the note on the first place that I find it, and let me just go from there. And I built myself and I dug myself into so many holes that way. But what I really learned was that, you know, at least past a certain point of technique, the amount of, you know, what is completely unplayable versus playable depending on where you finger it, it's not that make or break most of the time. Like, of course, there's things that you have to play a certain way, and the, you know, you have open strings or the technique, like, you know, asks for it, and in those cases, it's more specific, and you kind of have to dive into that. But at least until you get there, I've, you know, encountered so many situations where it's like, okay, it's not always make or break, but a lot of times, yeah, you can make your life a lot harder. And I was the kid that didn't really care. I was just like, I don't, you know, I could see that I'm all over the neck and that I'm like working way harder, but I really wanted to hear the song, you know. I at that point, I was so impatient that I didn't take the extra 20 minutes to, like, you know, examine all the different ways that you could do it and what could actually make my life easier. Now as an adult person, I you know, I'm more aware of that. But, like, you know, you develop your own habits. There's other things that pop up from doing your own work. You know, you figure out which fingerings work for you, and, you know, how those, you know, guitar articulations that are so specific, how they sit within what it has to be or doesn't have to be, you know. So it shows you what has to be exactly as it is, like you're talking about, or what is open to interpretation, and whether is my way of doing it easier to me than how they did it, or, you know. And now there's so many resources that you can like back your work up to, that, you know, even if you're just doing the work for ear training and you hit a wall, you can then kind of take the cheat sheet and understand, like, okay, so here's the technique, and then you get that aspect of it, and you also, like, gave your ears a run for their money today. So I think over time it's something that's built up, and something that I've learned over the years is that, like, at least when it comes to, like, distorted lead electric guitar, like, you start to understand the sound of, like, okay, here's the bends and here's the slides and here's the sound of the open string and all these different things that eventually you do build up to it has to be played that way. So there's ways around it. You just kind of have to be more patient and give yourself the time, and which I did not. So,
like, I remember it being, like, so vivid in my memory when I was listening to a record and I heard a D chord. And I didn't recognize it because of the pitches, but I recognized it of the intervals, the sound of that chord. Like, when you, even whether it's capoed up, whatever, when you play a D chord, an open regular D chord, that chord has a sound to it that if you've been playing guitar, you don't need perfect pitch to understand it, but you recognize that's the sound of that shape, you know?
Exactly.
So how would you approach, we've been talking a lot about single note stuff, but when it comes to harmony, and more like in jazz fusion guitar, when you have all these weird harmonies, can you play and demonstrate maybe a way you would hear a more complex chord and try to kind of work backwards to break that down to figure it out?
Yeah, so let's say, I have a lot of gain on here, but, like, let's say it's like just a major 7 chord, right? Trying not to, like, overflow it with gain, but if you have this chord, for example, right? Like, the way that I approach it is I'm very connected to the voice and singing stuff back, because I feel like whatever pitch I'm hearing in my head, like, whatever I'm singing, like, that's what my thought is, you know. It's like the direct connection between, like, really what you're hearing and putting it out. Now, whether your chops can hit that note is a different thing, but, like, hopefully you know what the note is that you mean. So for me, it's, if I'm hearing a full chord, I'm trying to first, like, pretend that it's a single note, to have, like, one characteristic note or melody note or whatever jumps out to me out of that chord to kind of hold on to and be like the starting point to figuring out that chord. So for example, like let's say...
Now, do you find that sometimes, do you find that note that sticks out is sometimes either the top or the bottom note?
It can be. It really depends on what it is. And I always ask my students too, like if they can sing along to something or just describe like really what they're hearing, because to me it's like so fascinating that we all hear things differently. We all hear different things jump out, and like you're never in somebody else's head, so you don't know how it sounds to them. But to me, it's just whatever jumps out of that situation. I kind of try to start there. So I try to like first match the pitch by being like, okay, I hear. Okay, so that's what I'm hearing. Okay, so let's see. All right, so that's an E, right? So part of it is like then trying to hear the rest of the notes, like, okay, is there something else that I'm hearing, you know? And then like kind of trying to match it on the guitar and see if is that an interval that's really in there. Playing it along with it can really help too, because if you have discrepancies, then hopefully you hear that, you know? And a lot of it is the theory knowledge too, because when you're hearing just one note on top of it, a lot of times it's going to be the root or the third, or even if it's some kind of color tension melody note, you can usually tell that's like, oh, if this is kind of like the flavorful note, then, you know, maybe it's not the root or whatever. So bring in kind of the theory aspect and test out different things. And between that and the ear training of it, again, it's a practice over years, you know, like, of course, for me, like a lot of times just getting like clusters of chords was a lot more tricky than single notes, but it is something that, like the other skill, you just build up to it and over time. And again, like playing on top of it and hearing that it's wrong, like that really helps. You know, there is a lot of trial and error involved when you're hearing like 70% of it and questioning yourself about the other 30.
Mm-hmm. So for you, as you kind of were going through the Berklee system and even growing up before then, where did transcription fit into all this for you?
So as far as like really writing stuff down, it's the kind of thing where I don't do it unless I absolutely have to. So yeah, in school there were certain situations where I had to like every at the end of every semester we had these tests called proficiencies, which is kind of how you graduate a level up in your guitar actual like private lessons. And you would have like a group of scales and chords and things to study, and then you would have to prepare some sort of piece or solo or something, and you always had to provide a transcription. So if I ever went for something that I liked that didn't have a transcription, after I learned it by ear, I would then have to like write it out, and I hated it because I was not good at the softwares, and I was like doing it on paper, and I was taking my time because you know how your handwriting is nowadays, and I don't miss that. So now I just, I've been using that word transcribing for years, but when I really mean, I don't write it down because that's...
I mean, to me, transcribing doesn't necessarily mean written.
Writing it out on
you
paper.
Could transcribe it in your head and you know it, and somehow your notation skills and your ear training skills and your technique all kind of converge at a certain point. You know what I mean? And also transcribing doesn't necessarily mean a solo or whatever. I mean, there's lots, like, same thing when I was in college. Like, we had to work on a transcription every semester, and it was always a complete work, if you will. But now, like, I don't think I've transcribed an entire solo, like, from point A to point Z since college, but I've transcribed a lot of little bits and pieces here, and even some of your stuff on your lessons, transcribed that too.
Yeah, well, you remember that. I was like, oh my God, I have to like write out the transcriptions. Yeah, and that's why you had to correct so many of them.
And not as many as you might think, but...
Well, I appreciate you, but yeah.
So if somebody wants to, what would say are the kind of the big things, if somebody wants to work ear training into their kind of solo practice time, what are some things that you'd recommend to students or that you even used in your own practice time when you want to say, okay, I need to take 15 or 20 minutes and work on ear training?
So for me, a big part of it is just learning stuff that I love to play or love to listen to mostly, and again, like that approach of getting really familiar with something before you're learning it, for me is a really, really big help. So anything that, I mean, it's going to sound super cliche, but anything that like really inspires you to like, I want to play X, like go for whatever that is, because to me, that was the single thing that made me want to practice the guitar. Before I had songs that were very guitar-oriented music that made me like really want to try and figure them out, it was never really going to grab me from just taking guitar lessons. So to me, I try to go back to the core of that like excitement, and whatever you can approach with that, you're going to have a better time, because learning stuff by ear can be really frustrating, and you can really like, I had like a teacher back in Israel like long ago that like said like he had this like very visceral way of putting it where he was like, you're gonna puke blood like until you get the right notes, because it's just like it really feels like that sometimes. It can be so frustrating, but like there's a great software called Transcribe that is just a great. It's really powerful. It's got a lot of like things that it can do that I don't even use or know how to use, but it's such a great tool, because even if you're not slowing stuff down, which I tend not to, I try not to if I don't absolutely have to, but like it's just a really helpful tool to working on it, because when you're listening, let's say you're listening to something that has a lot of notes in a short amount of time, sometimes when you're going through it, you might be hearing the right notes and thinking you're in the wrong place in the phrase, because it's so easy to lose your spot when you have so many notes at a short time. So that kind of tool that allows you to like, color over sections that you can loop, or you can really like isolate small pieces of where you're at, so that you're making sure that you're not just hearing the right notes, but not like thinking that you're in the wrong spot. So like little things like that, it's literally, I've told my students so many times, like if you're working with iTunes or something, sometimes it can literally be like a game of how quick you can press the space bar to play and pause it, so that you're just zeroing in on the one note that you're missing out of a cluster or something, So just tools to like help that fight are huge, because a lot of times you can think that you just, learned the wrong stuff when really you didn't. You just got lost. It's really easy to get lost. So sometimes those are the things that can make it frustrating, and having a tool that works with that can just make the whole experience like, smoother.
So you brought up a very big point that I want to ask you about. Now, I have friends who are on both sides of the fence here when it comes to slowing down stuff. Now, I've slowed down stuff. I've tried not to slow down stuff. But when you're hitting a Guthrie Govan solo, there's going to be a certain point where you're going to be like, I have to slow it down, right? To me, it's like it all depends on your ultimate goal after you transcribe something. Is it for your own just personal enjoyment and, and betterment of yourself in your playing? Or is somebody hiring you to transcribe it? Do you need to teach it to somebody? Do you have to play it on a gig? So what are your thoughts on the slow down versus not slow down fence?
For me, it's never really bothered me if I do it or if somebody else does it, because to me, at least the way that I learn stuff by ear, it's going to be the same exact process. Like it's literally like, hear the first note, match the first note, hear the next note, match or clusters of notes. But if you water it down, it's that. And so to me, it's like the tempo of the song is irrelevant, because whether it's slow or fast, I'm still doing the same work, So I think you're right. I think there's a point past which, the ear can pick up. I mean, Guthrie plays very cleanly, so it's clear, you know what I mean? But like sometimes you have to slow it down. But even if you slow it down a little bit and it's the exact same thing and it's still fast, I mean, is the goal like I have to learn how to do the hardest licks without slowing them down? Because if the goal is just to get better and use your ear to learn something, or like you said, to prepare for a gig and time is an issue or something like that, I don't feel like they're really shortcuts, because you're still doing the same work. But that's my opinion.
That's what we're here for, Neely. We're here for your opinion.
I know. I just, you don't want to hate on anything. There's so many different ways to learn stuff and different things that work for others. So, well, I guess speaking of transcription projects, I just learned Cliffs of Dover for the first time, and I can't. I mean, God, that's so much fun to play. But I realized that, or as I've been told on the internet, I do not play this where I guess it is. So the way that my ears figured it out. And I guess here's one of those things where you can play it in different spots and it's still playable. But to me, it came as... that's not how it is, but I'm gonna go with it. So it's really hard to swing that to nothing, you know.
And you're talking not how it is as far as position based.
Right. Same pitches. I really tried to, like, you know, again, listen for the articulations, where the slides are, the slides forwards or backwards, you know, like my spirit is always to like go as accurately as possible, but also like, you know, if that means that you're changing the vibrato a little bit because to you it's easier to make your best sound come out of it that way, it's like, again, it's as close as possible with making sure that you're playing it as best you can.
And that's funny because when I learned that melody, I learned it like 5 frets up on the next lower set of strings. That's where I learned it at.
Yeah, and I hear that a lot. That's what I heard a lot of this week, and I was just like, huh. And I was talking to Gretchen Menn about this, and I was just like, we were just talking about exactly this, and I was like, yeah, you know, I kind of have like my sweet spot, like between like the 7th fret and the 12th or something, and anything that I transcribe, like if it's in that register, it kind of falls here.
Friend of the podcast, Gretchen Menn. We can officially say that now.
That's right.
That she's a past guest. So thank you so much, Neely, for
no worries.
opening our minds and our ears to this, and now it makes me want to go and play Guess That Chord or something. So
it's not as fun as you make it seem.
Or Cliffs of Dover, you know.
All right, everybody. So stick with us. We'll have Neely back one more time this week, and we'll see you then.